on the bottom of Hey Amud Aleph in the Steinsaltz Koren Talmud. We are on page 218, second paragraph. So it's been a long time. In the previous mission, in which we started in the last class, 4B, we spoke a little bit about the laws of Purim and times of Megillah reading. And one of the things that we pointed out was, right, the day of Purim is for unwalled cities is the 14th, for walled cities is the 15th. And if need be, the date from reading of the Megillah will be changed to earlier, but never to later. 15th is the final day. It cannot be read, it will never be read after. But if Purim falls out on a Shabbos, or remember, if you're the villages, so it'll go to earlier but not to later. And the Mishnah pointed out, but there are other cases, not Purim related, that if they can't happen at their time, they'll go to later, not to earlier. For example, we said families used to have a particular date of the year that they would contribute wood to the temple. And on that day, they would make their contribution and they would come and they'd bring an offering in the temple. If that fell out on Shabbos, they couldn't do it on Shabbos, and then they do it on Sunday. Tisha B'Av, if the fast falls out on Shabbos, you can't fast on Shabbos, so you fast on Sunday. The Korban Chagiga, the festival offering, which is supposed to bring on the first day of Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, but if it falls out on Shabbos, like it was this year, you would not offer it on Shabbos, you offer it on Sunday, because either way you have 7 days to bring the offering. And then Hakel as well. So we brought a number of examples.
Wasn't there a scenario where it was 3 days that you bring the gifts one day, and
so yeah, there was the different offerings. There was the that's was talking about Yom Tov, not about Shabbos. So there's when it comes to first day Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot on the festival, you have to bring two offerings. You have to bring a Shalmei Chagiga, a shlamim, a peace offering that's in honor of the festival, which part of it is burnt, part of it is given to the Kohen, part of it you eat. So that you can offer on Yom Tov because it's getting eaten, and you could do that on Yom Tov. But then there was also the Oilas Re'iyah. You had to bring a special Ola offering for Hashem, and that was completely consumed on the Mizbeach, so there was no eating in that. So that could not be slaughtered on Yom Tov because there's no personal benefit, so that you did the next day.
But did you read the Megillah on one day?
We have
another day. It's like a 3 day.
Purim is Shulish. If Purim is Friday, and then Shabbos, and then Sunday, right? If the 14th falls out on Friday, on Shabbos, yeah. So the 13th, and then Sunday, yeah. Okay. Now we're up to a new passage. Amar Rabbi Elazar, the last line of 5B. Yeah, I think so. Okay, second paragraph. Amar Rabbi Elazar, page 218. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Elazar said in the name of Rabbi Chanina, Rebbe nata natia b'Purim. He says as follows: three laws or three anecdotes. Number one, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, you once planted a sapling, a plant on Purim. And he bathed on a market day in Tzipori on the 17th of Tammuz. So Tzipori is a northern village of Israel where Rebbe moved to, and a lot of sages moved to. In fact, the Sanhedrin was for a period of time located in Tzipori. Tzipori was a city of a lot of sages.
Where is it located?
Northern Israel. It's near Tiberia. Later, Rebbe actually moved, or earlier, Rebbe lived in Tiberia, as we're going to see, Tiberias. But this is when he lived in Tzipori, and it was a market day. Kroina, the word kroina, how is it translated over here? Wagons. So kroina can mean wagons. So in other words, the streets are full of wagons because it's a market day. That's the idea. And Rebbe bathed sort of publicly. I mean, I don't think he bathed on the street, but everyone saw him going into the bathhouse, even though it was the 17th of Tammuz, which is a fast day. We learn about that. And then the third thing about him is Obikesh Lakar Tisha B'Av. He tried to uproot, to abolish the Tisha B'Av. But the sages did not consent.
So before these, Purim was a non-work day?
Oh, that's a big question. You're saying, and you're understanding correctly, what's the issue of Rebbe planting a plant on Purim? Is Malachas planting allowed on Purim? Is it a work day or a non-work day? That's going to be a lot of discussion that we're going to have. So 3 things we're going to explore: the planting on Purim, the bathing on the 17th of Tammuz on the fast day, and that he tried to abolish Tisha B'Av. What does it mean, abolish Tisha B'Av? In other words, there are 4 fasts that the prophets talk about, and the 4 fasts commemorate the destructions of the temple, different stages. So there's the fast of the 17th of Tammuz, when the Babylonians broke the walls into Jerusalem. There's the fast of Tisha B'Av, when they actually destroyed the temple. There's the fast of the 10th of Tammuz, when they laid siege around 10th of Tevet, when they laid siege around Jerusalem. And there's the fast of the 3rd of Gadalia, when Gadalia was assassinated the day before, or 2 days before, in Rosh Hashanah. But he was the remaining governor in Israel, and the fast was pushed off the day after Rosh Hashanah. Now, on those fast days, of course, you can't eat. Tisha B'Av being the most strict, because Tisha B'Av's fast day begins from the night before, whereas the other fast days are more lenient, and their fast days begin only in the morning, the sunrise. And then there's something else about bathing. So on Tisha B'Av, we know, so gesund, on Tisha B'Av, 5 things are not allowed. 5 things. What are the 5 things? Eating, drinking, bathing,
Leather.
Okay, leather is not one of the primary 5 prohibitions of Tisha B'Av. It was added. Eating, drinking, bathing, like Simcha, like anointing oneself, and sexual relationships. Yes, those are 5 things of Tisha B'Av. Other fast days only have 2 things not allowed: eating and drinking. You are allowed to bathe. You are allowed to anoint oneself with different ointments, and you are allowed to have sexual relations. Anyways, they're supposed to be done at nighttime, and the fast is not at nighttime anyhow. So that might be an insight. Okay, that's one thing I want to point out. The other thing I want to point out is as follows. The sages established these fast days after the destruction of the first temple, right? But then the second temple was rebuilt. Was there still a need to fast? Right? So the Gemara has a whole discussion about this, and the Gemara says as follows: Tisha B'Av will forever remain a fast until Mashiach comes. Tisha B'Av commemorates the worst of the worst, destruction of so many, not just the temple, but millions of Jews. So Tisha B'Av will always remain. However, if it's a time of persecution, then we're still being persecuted, so then we do all the fasts. They're obligated. But if it's a time of peace, like when Mashiach comes, there won't be a need to fast. But if it's not persecution and not peace, in other words, when has there ever been such a time? A neutral time for the Jews. So then the Gemara says you have a choice. If you want, you can fast. If you need to fast, you fast. If not, you don't have to fast. At the same time, it seems that most communities accepted upon themselves to nonetheless fast. Okay. So when the Gemara says that Rebbe tried to abolish Tisha B'Av, what does that mean? Because what do you mean? Can't abolish Tisha B'Av. So Tosfos points out over here. Tosfos says, what do you mean? How can he abolish Tisha B'Av? The Gemara in Tainus says, whoever eats and drinks on Tisha B'Av will never see the rebuilding of Jerusalem, etc., etc. Can't be. So he gives 2 answers. One answer is he wanted to remove from Tisha B'Av its extra stringencies over other fast days. If other fast days you're only prohibited from eating and drinking, but you're not prohibited from other things, he wanted to make Tisha B'Av the same. That's one. Or other fast days are somewhat optional during a neutral time. Tisha B'Av is not. So Rebbe wanting to abolish Tisha B'Av probably means he just wanted to remove from Tisha B'Av the additional stringencies that it has that other fast days do not have. That's one answer of Tosfos. Another answer is that he actually wanted to abolish it from the 9th of Av and establish it on the 10th of Av. It shouldn't be Tisha B'Av, it should be Asar B'Av. Which, by the way, the Gemara originally said that it would make more sense to fast on Asar B'Av. Why? Because apparently fire was set to the temple or began to be destroyed Tisha B'Av late afternoon. So a little bit of destruction began on Tisha B'Av, but most of the destruction of the temple occurred on the 10th of Av. So there is some opinions in the Gemara that should be the fast day. In the end, the conclusion was you go after when it started. But it could mean that Rebbe just wanted to change the date of Tisha B'Av.
Always good.
I just have to give myself a sense of
This is going to have to protect me.
I have to protect me to be it's not all the way chance.
All right, let's go on. That is what Rabbi Elazar quoted about these three anecdotes of Rebbe. Amar lefanav Rabbi Abba bar Zavda. Rabbi Abba said, no. Rebbe loy kochayim. I said, that's not what happened with Rebbe. That you got it wrong. Let me give you the accurate story. Ella, rather, Tisha B'Av. He didn't try to abolish Tisha B'Av. It was 1 year where Tisha B'Av fell out on Shabbos. Now, if it falls out on Shabbos, you cannot fast on Tisha B'Av. So what did we say already? You push it off. So Rebbe said, Udechin lach Shabbos, and therefore the fast was pushed off to after Shabbat. And Rebbe said, Hoyel v'nitre, if you're already pushing it off, Yidoche, let it be pushed off entirely. This year there should be no need to fast. If it's Tisha B'Av and you have to fast, fine. But if you're already pushing it off to another day that's not its original day, Rebbe said, then just scrap it. Cancel it. That's what he wanted. And about that, the Chachamim did not agree with him, and they said the fast remains for Sunday. And so this was how Rabbi Abba corrected Rabbi Elazar in the name of Rabbi Chanina, and then so Rabbi Kari Alei. So Rabbi Elazar is very thankful that he was corrected, and he concludes and he says, "Tovim hashnayim min ha'echad," the famous verse from Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, 2 is better than 1. In other words, thank God that I said this. I had this whole wrong version of the story, and now that I said this out loud, and then you will hear as well, and you were able to correct me. So that's what we're doing over here. We're learning with each other. So when I say something wrong, I get something wrong, you correct me, etc., etc. That's important. It's a good rule in life. People who just live on their own, study on their own, read on their own, think on their own, they're missing out on the advantage of having another's opinion and mind chiming in on any ideas. And you see that a lot. Sometimes people are full of ideas and opinions, but they've never really shared them through and discussed them. And so they're lacking in some depth, which another person, even if you're right and they're wrong, or even if you'll want to agree with their opinion, but often an opposing opinion could really bring out more depth to your own opinion. So it's really important to, the Mishnah says, one of the ways to acquire Torah is through dibuk chaverim, is through studying with others. Studying alone is never a good thing.
Never a good thing.
Never
a good thing.
Good point. You can study alone. You should study alone. Meaning, but in addition to that, you have to have opportunities to study with others also.
It's very better than not studying, right?
Right.
Less better than studying.
Yeah. There's a lot of Balei Chasidut, a lot of Hasidic masters used to quote this passage of the Gemara, Hoyel v'nitre yitre. Rebbe says, once it's already pushed off, let it be pushed off. He literally means let it be pushed off for that year. But I think it's the Chozeh Mulublin and others who said, no, what Rebbe was trying to do is, since Tisha B'Av fell out on Shabbat, the power of Shabbat, right? Shabbos raises the consciousness of the world. Shabbos is a glimpse into the world of Olam Haba. That's what Shabbos is supposed to be. So even though we're stuck in Galut, we're stuck in exile, we're still suffering from the destruction of the temple, but Shabbos opens our eyes, our hearts, our minds to a true world, a world that's Yerushalayim HaBnuyah, a rebuilt world where God is once again sovereign and revealed in the world. So Rebbe was saying, hopefully with the power of Shabbos that year, I'm hoping this will completely uproot and push away Tisha B'Av entirely, because it was a prayer that Mashiach should come that year. So every year, every time when Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos, which happens not so uncommon. I don't remember, when did it happen last? I don't even remember. Not long ago. Yeah.
Well, I would think that logic would tell you once every 7 years.
No. Doesn't the
Which logic are you using?
doesn't the go year?
No, it falls. It
Yeah,
go Yom Rishon, Yom Sheni, Yom Shlishi. On Shabbos, you have 1 in 7 chance of it landing on that day.
No.
No?
No, I mean that would work out if the amount of days in every year is exactly 1 day more than a complete week, right? Let's talk about a Jewish calendar, which is 354 days. How many sevens is 54? Don't use a calendar.
Calculator.
Calculator. Actually, you're right. It's 49 weeks in a day, right?
50.57.
That's what it's 54. Yeah, so it's 50 weeks and 4 days. Right? So every year Tisha B'Av will be 4 days after the previous year.
So the math is different.
So for Shabbos, the next time will be Wednesday, the next time will be Sunday, the next time will be Thursday, the next time will be Monday, the next time will be Friday, next time will be Tuesday, next time will be Shabbos. Maybe you're still right though, it's still every 7 years.
With 4? Probably, right?
4 times 7 is
You have a
28,
1 in
yeah.
7
Yeah,
chance.
I guess.
That's how I.
You're right.
And then there are leap years, and then there's
You may be right.
All right, so now we have settled one of those anecdotes about Rebbe wanting to uproot Tisha B'Av, abolish Tisha B'Av, either as Tosfos originally learned, he meant he wants to remove some of the extra stringencies, or he wanted to change the date of Tisha B'Av, or as the Gemara later clarified, it happened to be an incident where Tisha B'Av fell out on Shabbat, and he wanted to say, well, that year it should be canceled, but it does not mean he tried to completely uproot the festival, or the fast of Tisha B'Av.
When it says here, my teacher, was Rabbi Abba Bar Zata a student of? I'm not understanding. Did he hear it firsthand from him that that's what he meant?
Rabbi Abba was present when Rabbi Elazar taught the previous teaching about Rebbe wanting to abolish Tisha B'Av.
Okay.
So he can clarify what really
not
happened.
a historical perspective, or rather a presential one.
Say that again.
This was not a historical perspective, but rather there were.
He was present there. Yeah. They seem to have had the conversation with each other. Yes, correct. Correct. Here, there's a note. Tzipori, look on the left, was a large town in the upper Galilee and the perennial rival of Tiberias for recognition as the religious capital of Galilee. During the Second Temple, enjoyed special status.
It's way before
A large
Sfat,
donor
right?
community.
That's way before Sfat.
Not way before, but yeah, a little before. There were many great sages who lived there, etc., etc. Rebbe's leading disciples lived there. Yeah. There's Yossi Peri. Okay, let's go back to the first anecdote that Rabbi Elazar mentioned. That Rebbe planted plants on Purim. Purim. How could Rebbe plant plants on Purim? Rabbi Yosef already taught that the Megillah, in its instruction in the final chapter, how to celebrate Purim, the Megillah mentions 3 things: Simcha, joy, umishteh, and feast, v'yom tov, and a festival day. What are the 3 things? So he says, Simcha, when it says joy, it means, Malamadis teaches us, she asurim behesped, you're not allowed to engage in sort of grieving practices. I mean, if you're a mourner, it's one thing, but if you were going to a funeral, you can't make a hesped, you can't make a eulogy. Right? Any day that's a festival day, let's say you're doing a funeral in Chol Hamoed Pesach, which happened, or any other festival day, you're not allowed to eulogize officially. There is, during the times of the Second Temple, we usually say that the Mishnah was the first book transcribed of the oral tradition. And up until the Mishnah's time, 2nd century, the only thing that was ever transcribed was the Torah, 5 books of Moses, and the prophets. But all of oral tradition was still Baal Peh, was still being relayed verbally from parent to child, student, teacher to student. But it's not entirely accurate. There were some transcripts that existed earlier. So one of them was something called Megillat Tanit, the scroll. It's called a scroll because it wasn't really a book. The scroll of Tanit, of fasts. And what it is a composition that was made during the times of the Second Temple of all days on the Jewish calendar that have special significance, at least at that time that they recorded, and were to be commemorated or celebrated as some kind of festival day, even in a minor way. Not talking about the major biblical festivals or even the major rabbinic festivals like Hanukkah, Purim, etc. But there are many other days, some of which we know about today, many of which we don't even know about today anymore. Days of miracles, days of, and it's all recorded in the Megillah Tanit. And on those days, we didn't say tachon if you were praying. Those days you were not allowed to allowed to fast if you wanted to make a personal fast. On those days, if you were burying somebody, you could not make a hesped, you could make a eulogy. There were certain festive practices for that day. So, I'm not 100% sure. I am sure, actually. I did know about it. Hananya, Hanina. It's attributed to somebody. I forgot who right now. So, Purim is a day of Simcha, which means you cannot do eulogies. Next, Mishteh, feasting. Malamed teaches you, Shasa B'tainis. Not allowed to fast on Purim because you have to have a feast. And the third thing, Yom Tov, why is it mentioning festival day? Malamed, he says, this teaches us, She'asur b'asiyas malachim, not allowed to do work on Purim. So this is the teaching that Rav Yosef is quoting, and based on this, the Gemara is asking, how was Rebbe planting plants on Purim? You're not allowed to do work. Remember, there are all other biblical festival days you can't do malacha, so there was an assumption, or he learned out of here, Purim, which is a rabbinic festival, you also not allowed to do any work. So that's the question, which we're going to have three answers to. Answer number one is, Ella, he says, one answer is, Rebbe bar abeser hava v'chinota b'chameser hava. Rebbe lived in a city which was unwalled, and therefore he celebrated Purim on the 14th. And when was he planting the plant? On the 15th, which was a day that he, as a resident of an unwalled city, was not obligated, was not celebrating Purim. So it's true, the original teaching of Rabbi Elazar says Rebbe planted plants on Purim. It doesn't mean his Purim. It means it was a Purim for some people, for the walled cities, but not for him. That's the first answer. Now the Gemara is not going to give us an easy time with this answer. The Gemara says, Ini, is that really true that Rebbe lived in an unwalled city and celebrated Purim on the 14th? But by that time, Rebbe was already living in Tiberias. And we have a tradition that Tiberias was a walled city from the time that Joshua entered into Israel with the Jewish people. And therefore, in Tiberia, they would be celebrating Purim on the 15th. So if you want to tell me Rebbe was not planting on the 14th, but the 15th, well, 15th for Rebbe was Purim, it was in Tiberia. So we can switch around the answer. Rebbe is a resident of a walled city. He celebrates Purim on the 15th. And when was he planting the plant? On the 14th. Which was Purim, not for him, but for other people. So, whichever one it is, you can always just revise history however you want. No, it says Rebbe planted the plant on Purim, but we're establishing here that it wasn't his Purim, but it was a Purim. The Gemara says, as a follow-up question, are you so certain that Tiberias is a walled city from when Joshua entered into Israel? It's not so simple. Why? We know that Cheskia, who lived in Tiberia, would actually read the Megillah twice, on the 14th and on the 15th. Why? Because he was not sure if it is a walled city from the times of Joshua or not. And so he didn't know if his Purim is the 14th or 15th. So out of doubt, he read the Megillah on both. I don't know if he made a blessing on both days. That would be an interesting question. Probably not, because out of doubt you don't make a blessing. But the main mitzvah, which is reading the Megillah, he did on both days.
And does he do or do not? You do not.
Not when it comes to doubts about rabbinic matters. You always go leniently. A blessing is a rabbinic matter, a rabbinic institution. So you go leniently. You would not recite. And now let's say it's Rosh Hashanah. Whatever. It's Sukkot, and I forgot if I shook lulav and esrog or not. So the mitzvah of lulav and esrog is a biblical mitzvah. So you have to do it again, out of doubt. The blessing on the mitzvah is only rabbinic, so he won't make a blessing. So you'll shake it again, but he won't make a blessing. Let's say you're eating food. I forgot if I made a blessing on the food. You don't make a blessing because I'm not sure. But let's say I forgot if I made a Birchat Hamazon and after blessing. Well, that's biblical, so that you do make a blessing. So how were you so certain that Rebbe, who lived in Tveria, it's a walled city, and they reached on the 15th? Chizkiah wasn't sure, and he read on both days. So the Gemara answers, L'Chizkiah mesapke Rebbe pshitele. Chizkiah didn't know, but Rebbe knew. Chizkiah didn't have a good education in history. But Rebbe knew this is a walled city from Yeshua's time.
How come it wasn't common knowledge whether it was a walled city or not?
Think about this. How much after Yeshua's times are we now? We're about 12 to 1300 years after Yeshua entering into Israel. Okay, we're over a millennium.
But you had the oral tradition passed
How
down.
come one was sure and the other wasn't? Were they contemporaries or? This would seem to indicate that
Okay, so
Chizkiah was prior to Rebbe.
okay, so the truth is we're going to learn an answer. The Gemara is going to discuss this a bit later, which I'm going to try to get up to today. We're going to move fast. That's a good question. So far we've answered that Rebbe did not plant on his Purim, he planted on a Purim. For Rebbe who lived in Tveria, he was certain that it's a walled city. He read the Megillah on 15th and he planted on the 14th. Yeah. Now the Gemara asks, "V'chib shitale mishari." Even if Rebbe's Purim was on the 15th, is it so obvious that he's allowed to plant on the 14th? Megillat Tanit, which I quoted earlier, which records all the dates that you're supposed to be commemorating, kind of a festive day. It says there, 14th and 15th are days of Purim, that you should not eulogize on those days. Okay, so Megillat Tanit clearly records 14th and 15th are festival days, not to perform eulogies. And Rava commented about that quote from Megillat Tanit, V'amar Rava, le'nitzrecha ela leser shazeh b'shazeh b'shazeh b'shazeh. Rava is saying, hold on a minute. Megillat Tanit tells me that both 14th and 15th are Purim days, not to be performing eulogies. I don't understand. The Megillah already says 14th and 15th are Purim days. Right? Like I need the Megillat Esther says it. I don't need Megillat Tanit that's written a few centuries later to tell me this. So he says, no. Megillat Esther tells you it's 14th for some people and 15th for others, walled or unwalled cities. Megillat Tanit says that both days are Purim days for everybody, in the sense that even if you're not celebrating Purim today because you're not reading Megillah and performing the Purim mitzvot because you are in a walled city and it's the 14th or in an unwalled city the 15th, nonetheless, it's still a form of Purim celebration for you, to the extent that you should not be performing eulogies, should not be doing malacha, other limitations of Purim. That's the addition of the teaching in Megillat Tanit. Even if it's not your Purim, it's still a Purim, and we still refrain from festive activities which are not in the spirit of the festival. Which would seem to imply at this point in the question that even if it wasn't Rebbe's Purim, he still should not have been planting plants. So the Gemara answers, this teaching of Megillat Tanit that says even if it's not your Purim, still celebrate somewhat of a Purim, is with regards to two things: fasting and eulogizing. You can't fast and eulogize even on the day that's not your Purim. Of a malacha, but performing labor, Yom Echad V'Tur law is only limited to your Purim, but if it's not your Purim, even if it's a Purim, you can do malacha, you can do labor, and therefore Rebbe could plant his plant on the 14th.
Who said that?
Rava. Fred the Gemara, we're going a lot of question answers over here. Stay with me. The Gemara asks, so you have just told me that even if it's not your Purim, you can't eulogize, you should not be fasting, but you can do malacha, yeah? So the Gemara, is that so? Rahav once saw somebody planting flax on Purim, and we're assuming it wasn't his Purim day, but it was the day of Purim. Like let's say he was in a walled city, it was the 14th, not the 15th, and he was planting his field. Velatye, and Rav got so disappointed that he was violating the law that Rav cursed him. Velot soma kitnei, and no flax grew for him that year. He didn't reap any blessings from his labor. That clearly seems to imply that even though it's not your Purim day, but if it's a Purim day, not only can you not fast and not eulogize, but you also can't work. Otherwise, why is Rav cursing him? The Gemara answers, Hosan bar Yom Mahava. No. That story, it was an actual Purim. That's why he cursed him. And by the way, you could interrupt over here for a moment and say, what was the original question and what's the answer? The question was that Rav cursed somebody. Now you had to put in, like I put in, you say, and we're going to assume that it wasn't his Purim. Well, why'd you assume that? Maybe we knew all along it was his Purim. It was not even a question. We assuming it's not his Purim, and we answer it was his Purim. Well, why'd you assume it wasn't his Purim? Like, what's the strength of this question?
Could have been breaking
The actual Purim.
Right. Which is what this is saying.
Which is what the answer is, but the answer I could have known before the question. So there's Rishonim that deal with it. So I think some Rishonim actually have a different version of the Gemara over here. Anyway. Okay. So far we've answered that Rebbe could plant a plant because it wasn't his day of Purim, it was just a Purim day. On your day of Purim, you can't do fasting, eulogizing, or labor, malacha, but on the other day of Purim, you can't do fasting, eulogizing, but you can do malachas, you could plant plants, yeah? Now we have another answer. Rabba Bereder Rava Amar, Rabba says, Afilu tema b'yoymei. You can even say that it was his Purim. Nonetheless, even though in the original enactment of Purim, it seems that Mordechai wanted that three things should be prohibited: fasting, eulogizing, and malacha. Nonetheless, not all of them remained binding. Hesped v'tainis, the prohibition against eulogizing and fasting, kabel alayhu, people accepted upon themselves. That became a law that stuck. Malacha, the prohibition against doing malacha on Purim did not stick. It never became instituted into the festival of Purim. It's not something that stuck.
Then why did Rav curse the man with the flax if it didn't stick?
Great question.
He just didn't like it.
The Gemara is going to ask that question. How do we know it didn't stick? That's a strange thing. Mordechai wants something to happen and it didn't happen. Like, what's going on over here? Like,
But where in the Megillah said that you shouldn't work?
So the Megillah says, Simcha umishte v'yom tov. Simcha excluded, you're not allowed to eulogize. Mishte said you're not allowed to fast, and Yom Tov said you're not allowed to work.
But Yom Tov is the same thing that we actually consider now as Yom Tov.
You know, in the Torah, we call our festivals Yom Tov. The Torah does never give the word Yom Tov. The Torah has Chag, the Torah has Atzeret, the Torah has other words. The Yom Tov is a rabbinic word. Well, not so rabbinic. It comes from the Megillah already. Tanakh has Yom Tov. So the assumption is that Yom Tov means a full-fledged festival excluding Malacha. That's the assumption. That's what Rav Yosef taught us. He learned that from those words. But we're saying now that that one did not catch on. And we have a proof for that from the Megillah itself. The Gemara says, Demeikara, originally when Mordechai was giving instructions how he wants the festival to be set up for future generations, he said, Simcha, Mishte, Yom Tov. All of a sudden, however, when there was the actual practice of the Jews implementing the Purim celebration, what does the Megillah say? La'asot otam yemei mishteh v'simcha. The Jews will make them into days of mishteh, festival, and simcha and joy. But yom tov lo ksiv. You'll notice it's a few passages later in the Megillah, it's missing that word. The Jews said to Mordechai, you want us to make a festival of Purim? Great. Hamantashen, with pleasure. Whiskey, no worries. Costumes, great. Not fasting? Sure. Not eulogizing? Okay. Not worrying? Don't go there. Don't go there. And there is a concept. You can't do this when it comes to biblical law. You can't tell God, Kippur this year is going to be a little rough, You can't tell it to God, but you can tell it to the rabbis. Meaning, when rabbis make gezeros, when rabbis make decrees or enactments for a community, they can only make enactments that are sustainable. Right. So there's a concept called gezerah she'ein harabim yechalin lamad boy. When there's an enactment that the public, it's just too much. You're too demanding from the public. They're not going to be able to hold up to it. Then it doesn't catch on. It's not a law anymore. So I don't know if this falls exactly into that category of Gzeir She'ein Ram Yechad Lamed Boy, but either way, we do see that you do need the Chazal needs some kind of consent of the people, and when it came to the prohibition of Malacha, there was no consent from the people.
Does a mikvah, going to a mikvah, fall into that category that didn't catch on as an obligation by the rabbi?
Yes. So depends whose mikvah. So a mikvah for a woman that is a tameya, that's biblical. A mikvah for a man that's tamei, theoretically, if he were to come in contact, there's different tumas and there's different types. A tumas nida, a nida impurity applies nowadays, and the purity from a nida impurity through mikvah also applies nowadays. So it's biblical. The impurity of a man, which can come from many different sources, but the only reason a man would require purity would be to enter the temple today. Well, that's not a purity we can attain anymore anyhow. You actually need a paraduma for that. So there's no biblical mitzvah of mikvah for men nowadays. Only for women, but not for men. That being said, there's a law in Shulchan Aruch that a person is obligated to go to the mikvah before Yom Kippur. That's a pretty strict obligation. There's another law in Shulchan Aruch that a person is obligated or commanded or recommended or suggested to go to mikveh before festivals in general. And then there's all kinds of customs of going before Shabbat or on Shabbat or every day, all different kinds of customs. Chassidim especially go to the mikveh very often. But then during the times of the Gemara, there's a big tent out there if you want. During the times of the Gemara, there was Ezra who tried to make a special takana because when a man emits seed, whether it's being with his wife or any kind of seed, there's an impurity. And Ezra said, well, we should obligate men every time they emit seed to go to mikveh the next morning. Before they daven, before they study, they have to go to mikveh. Ezra wanted to institute that as a law. And the Gemara says about that even though many people did catch on to, however, it did not become binding because it was too much. Remember, in those days to go to the mikveh wasn't like today, you can take a little drive. You have to go to the river, you have to go who knows where, you got to break ice in the winter, or whatever. Not so simple. So it did not catch on. It never became law. It still remained minhag for a lot of people, and a lot of people there's Chassidim that will go every day, for example, to mikveh in the mornings. But even if they don't, a lot of people after emitting seed, for example, will go to mikveh the next morning or whenever it is. It's still a very prevalent custom in many communities, but it's not law anymore. So now we're seeing that this law of not doing malacha on Purim never caught on. So the Gemara asks Maria's question, Rav, my time said, why did Rav curse that person who was planting flax in his field on Purim? What did he do wrong? So listen carefully. A famous principle. Because it's one of these things which are essentially mutar, permissible, but the community accepted upon themselves as forbidden. In other words, if you live in a community and the community has adopted a practice to be strict about something, then you don't have the permission to be lenient about it, because you are a member of that community. This person lived in a... So now, according to the law, Malacha never became outlawed for Purim. But we see clearly there were communities who nonetheless accepted upon themselves not to do Malacha on Purim. Now, when we say not to do Malacha, by the way, to be clear, it may not mean not to do like the Shabbos violation of Halacha, like total abstention from work. It may mean not to do like Chol Hamoed Malacha, like work that's not in the spirit of the festival. In any event, that city had that custom to be strict about it, and therefore this person was being lenient. You're not allowed to do that, and therefore Rav cursed him. He was going against the custom of the town. However, Ba'asrei the Rebbe who planted was fine. Why? Because in Rebbe's city, no, they never accepted upon themselves such a prohibition. So Rebbe's city allowed Malacha on Purim. This person's city did not allow, and that's a Rav cursed him.
That's the answer that is given.
So the first answer we gave about Rebbe that he planted a plant on Purim was because it wasn't on his Purim day, it was the other Purim day. Second answer is because we learned that in the end, even though Mordechai tried to outlaw Malacha on Purim, in the end, it didn't become outlawed. Yeah? Why didn't it become outlawed? Why didn't the people accept it? I once heard an interesting explanation. Let's see if I remember it properly. So there was a big Rosh Yeshiva before the war, after the war. Later he moved to New York. Actually, he had close relations with the Lubavitcher Rebbe. They were in Berlin together, university. Some of these great giants were there, and then they came to New York, and he was the Rosh Yeshiva of Chachmei Lublin, Rav Hutner, Rav Yitzchak Hutner. So he wants to explain this as follows. He said that there's a teaching from the Vilna Gaon as follows. Vilna Gaon asked the question. There's two major rabbinic festivals, Purim and Hanukkah. Yet they differ. On Purim, there's a big mitzvah to have mishteh, have feasts, but we don't say Hallel on Purim. Hanukkah, we say Hallel every day, but there's no mitzvah to have feasts, to have a Suda on Hanukkah. Purim is mishteh v'simcha, and Hanukkah is Hallel v'hidah. Praise, thanksgiving, but not mishteh. He says, why? What's going on over here? They're both big miracles. What's the difference? There's many explanations to this, but he said as follows. The Vilna Gaon said as follows. Put your thinking cap on. In the Torah, there are how many festival days according to Torah? I think it's 18. 7 of Pesach, 7 of Sukkot, 1 of Shmini Atzeret, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. Where am I holding? I lost count. Shavuot. What am I at? 18, yeah? 7, 14, and then Shemini Atzeret, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Shavuot. 18. 18 festival days. Okay? Now, you would imagine that in all those festival days there should be Hallel. However, when the sages instituted Hallel, and Hallel meaning full Hallel, there were 8 of these days that they did not institute Hallel.
What about Rosh Hashanah?
So, the original takana of Hallel, I'm saying Hallel means full Hallel. And Rosh Chodesh is only half Hallel. That was added much later. Who got full Hallel? All of those 18 days except for 8 of them. The last 6 days of Pesach, only the first 2 days of Pesach is full Hallel. The last 6 days did not get a Hallel. That's 6. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur also didn't get a Hallel. 8 days did not get a Hallel. Later, we added half Hallel to the last days of Pesach and half Hallel to Rosh Chodesh.
Is it all the last days of Pesach?
Yeah, or after the first 2 festival days. It's very interesting. Sukkot is every day full Hallel, but Pesach, only half Hallel after
Even
the first 2
the
days.
Shabbat?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you said too much. Okay, so 8 days did not get a Hallel. So Sir Vilna Gaon explains. So when the rabbis were implementing rabbinic festivals, they wanted to make up for those 8 days of Hallel. So where did they put it? 8 days of Hanukkah. 8 days of Hanukkah saying Hallel made up for the 8 biblical festivals that don't have Hallel. Okay? And now, of all those biblical festivals, there's one day that there's no mishter, there's no mitzvah of feast. Pesach you have to feast, and Shavuos you have to feast, and Sukkot you have to feast. Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah you feast, but not Yom Kippur. Kippur there's no feast. So the rabbis wanted to make up for that missing day of feast, and they chose the one rabbinic festival of Purim. So Hanukkah makes up for the 8 missing halals, and Purim makes up for the one missing feast. So now we can understand. Maybe he says, Rav Hutner says, why there's no problem of melacha, because Purim, by the way, it fits in very nicely, because Purim we see is making up for Yom Kippurim. Yom Kippur doesn't have a Mishnah, so Purim has the Mishnah. And Purim and Yom Kippurim are very much linked with each other in many, many ways. Yom Kippur was the day of Teshuvah, the day the Jews received the second tablets after God forgave them. Second chances. Purim also, the Gemara says that even though we received the Torah at Har Sinai, but we re-received it with greater commitment on Purim itself. So Purim bears a lot of similarities to Yom Kippurim. In fact, the word Yom Kippurim is the day like Purim, Purim, and especially in Hasidic teachings, it talks about the relationship between Purim and Yom Kippur very much. In fact, Purim is even greater than Yom Kippur, etc., etc. So Yom Kippur is already Asur b'Malacha, already is not allowed to do malacha, so there's no need to make up for that. It's only missing mishteh, it's only missing the feast, so we'll go to Purim and put the feast. But it's not missing the prohibition of malacha. You have that in Yom Kippur, so there's no need to put that into Purim now. So therefore, they didn't feel the need that Purim should also be forbidden from malacha. Anyhow, that's his interesting answer.
Somewhat off topic.
Yeah.
Why don't we say Hallel in Rosh Hashanah, for example? I can understand it. Why not on Kippur, being a fast day?
So Rosh Hashanah is called Bakese L'Yom Chagenu. The Torah says, Tehillim says, it's a day of hiddenness. The moon is hidden, right? It's the first of the month. And there's many explanations to that. And one of the things is not to remind the Satan. For example, there's a lot of things to confuse the Satan, whatever that means. This is one of them.
Okay.
Then there's something about Yom Adin, on the day of judgment. You don't have so much to think about. You've got to. You're a bit too nervous, Rosh Hashanah, to, carefree sing Hallel on the day of judgment doesn't fit right. I went to the beautiful pshat. Why on Purim? Why on Sukkot every day there's full Hallel, but on Pesach only on the first 2 days, but not the last 6 days? So the beautiful answer goes like this: Hallel. Let's think about Hallel. When are you motivated to say Hallel? When are you motivated with Simcha? You're motivated with Simcha when there's something new in your life. When everything is the same old, it's hard to be so b'simcha. You've got to find a novelty. Which, by the way, the Torah says that every day you have to try to find novelty, right? The Gemara comments about Bayom Hazeh Bo Midbar Sinai. On this day, the Jews arrived at Sinai, which was Rosh Chodesh Sivan. So the Gemara says, what do you mean on this day? It was that day. It was historically. Why is it saying this day as if it's in the present? Because B'chol Yom Yu Beneka Chadashim. Every day, the Torah has to seem like something new, a new gift in your life. You have to find newness every single day, because the truth is, if today there's nothing new, I'm not feeling it, and I'm just a repeat of yesterday, what a silly day. So it's a spiritual concept, it's a psychological concept, it's a halachic concept. You have to find newness in every single day, in every single experience. Now,
Matzah.
Huh?
You get matzah.
Matzah. Yeah. So the shachiyan was on real new occasions. I mean, there's this concept. Maybe you should make shachiyan every single day, if you manage to create. Okay, we don't do that. All right. So now let's think about this. On Sukkot. Now this is even a deeper teaching. Sukkot, the amount of sacrifices every day was a different amount. 13 bulls on the first day, 12 on the second day, 11 on the third day, 10 on the fourth day, 9, 8, and 7. Whereas on Pesach, the amount of offerings each day is exactly the same. So when it came to second day Pesach, or outside of the third day Pesach, the offerings, I already did it yesterday. So there's not that motivation, or not that impulse for so much simcha. Sukkot every day is different. Even though every day is less than the previous day, But the fact is, it's different. Every day in your life has to be different than the day before. It may be higher, it may be lower, but it has to be different. Right? Nothing's ever in a perpetual going up motion, right? Take your business, okay? Every day there has to be new drama. Either you win something or you lose something, but if you didn't win today or lose today, if everything today is status quo, the same as yesterday, what a waste of a day, right? And even losing is winning and winning is losing, right? That's the path towards success or the path towards your achievements. But there's movement going on. That's something that's alive. And if everything today is just the same way yesterday, so then it's not alive. So it's not a cause for halal. It's not a cause for joy.
So you're saying that a schedule is not good, in that you can't.
And I'm going to get this from Mario.
And you can't do the same thing every day. Is that what you're saying?
I think one of the Rebbes used to say, "As darf sein a bilti seder in a seder." You have to have a level of chaos within the organized structure. So in other words, it starts off with an organized structure. It's true, which is the whole message of Pesach, Seder. Okay, you go to the Seder, it has to be a Seder. You can't succeed in the night of Pesach. You can't succeed in the ceremony if you don't have Seder. You've got to draw up a Seder. But at the same time, the beauty of that Seder, of that system, of that routine, of that organized formula is going to be when it's injected with a little bit of, you know what they say? That there are two kinds of people who fail. Those who don't make a plan and those who insist on sticking to their plan. They both fail, those people. If you don't plan, sure. But if you plan and you are rigid to your plan, you're also not going to succeed, because there's no such thing as plans cannot foresee every single variable on the ground, right? In theory, I've planned my day out. I've planned the project out. Yeah, but wait till you hit the ground. Hit the ground, all of a sudden, I didn't know about this or about that or about that. So if you don't have a level of flexibility within your system, you're not going to be able to pull through. So you need to have that as well.
I hear you on an intellectual level.
What did he also say? If you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. Right? Anyhow. Whoa, time is flying by. We're not going to get up to kick his question. Or maybe we will. Let's see, where are we? Let's do the third answer.
Where are we?
V'iboi. Answer number one was that Rebbe was planting, not on the festival day, his festival day. Answer number two, he was planting his festival day, and you're allowed to, because in the end, it wasn't Asa b'malacha, unless there were certain communities that did adopt the stringency. And a third answer is as follows. La'olam nahuk. We could say that Rebbe was planting on his Purim day. And we can also say that in Rebbe's city, they did adopt the stringency of not doing malacha on Purim. So how could he be planting a plant? Rebbe was planting not a regular plant, but a plant of Simcha. What's a plant of Simcha? Like the bonsai plant that you got this year, yeah? That's a plant of Simcha. What is it? Yes, officially. I don't know. They say the Japanese have it for thousands of years.
Yeah, why not?
Kedatnan. There's a very interesting Mishnah that says, here, there's the Mishnah in Tainus. So the Tainus talks about what happens when there's a drought. Okay, there's a serious crisis. There's a drought in Israel. People are suffering. There's no food. There's no drink. Nothing's growing. There's no rain. So there's a series of fasts to make. Okay, and there's all different scenarios, different kinds of fasts, and there's Monday and Thursday fasts, and there's like 13 different kinds of implementations of fast that the community would adopt in order to appeal to Hashem to make it rain. What if Avru Elu V'Leinenu, you did all the fasts, you did all the formula, but it still doesn't work? The rain did not start. So then you enter into a new mode. You don't continue fasting anymore, but now the community goes into a communal state of mourning. You do mourning practices. Mematin b'masa matan. We now refrain from business, commerce, binyan, construction, natiya, planting, erusin, engagements, nisuin, weddings. We go into a mourning mode that it's a kind of appealing, reaching out to Hashem. Okay? That's the law. The Tanya law. And it was taught about that law as follows. There's an exception. This that you cannot engage in business, or you cannot build, you cannot plant, there are exceptions. What's the exceptions? Binyan shos. Sorry. Other way around. This that we outlawed, business, construction, and planting, was not all kinds of business, construction, and planting, but what was it? Binyan shel simcha. Construction that's for the sake of a simcha. Or natia, planting, natia shel simcha. If you need to build a house because your roof flew off, okay, build your roof. But if you're building a simcha building, or you're planting a simcha tree, that we don't do during this time when we're appealing to Hashem to make it rain. What is a simcha building and what is a simcha plant? So the Gemara says, what's a simcha building? It used to be the custom that when your son was getting married, you would build a house for him. Those are not parents. You would build a house for your son, and you would put a chuppah there, and the wedding would be in the house. And then that night, and then they would live there in that house. That was the custom. Well, you can't build that house during this time. You can't even do the wedding during this time. And you can't even build the house during this time. So you can't build that kind of building. And what is a simcha planting? Someone who plants like a royal garden tree. So there was the custom of royalty, of kings, of princes, that they would plant these kinds of trees. And it's not clear. I wonder if he says here what kind of tree it is. But it's a kind of tree that would provide like unique shade. And the way I've understood it is it's either there are certain trees that have like either you can do this in certain, you can design it that it sort of make the branches interweaving with each other and it creates this very pretty look and a nice shade to sit in, or vines that you build like a wood structure like a pergola or something, and then it grows all over them. So these are kinds of plants that royalty would plant for their backyards and their little garden areas, and it's where they would sit and relax and get fed grapes and wine and whatever. So those kinds of plants that are pure luxury plants you cannot plant during this time. They're called simcha plants. But regular plants is whatever you're allowed to. So we see there's something called a simcha plant. So you can't do it during the time of mourning. On Purim, it's different, the other way around. Regular malacha you shouldn't be doing, but Rebbe wasn't doing regular malacha. Rebbe was planting a simcha plant. In honor of Purim, that's the best time. It's the most appropriate time to plant a simcha plant because you have to be b'simcha. So therefore, it was okay for Rebbe to plant the plant on Purim.
So that was the third
explanation how Rebbe was planting a plant on Purim. Talking about fast for droughts. You know the old joke, right? There was once an Indian tribe, and the members of the tribe came to the chief, and they said it was winter, it was fall time, and they said, "Chief, is it going to be a cold winter this year?" He said, "Is it going to be a cold winter this year?" He said, "It looks like it. You should start collecting wood." Okay, they go out to collect wood. But he's doubting himself. He doesn't have the magical powers that they think he has. So he goes to the nearest payphone and he calls the National Weather Center and he says, "Tell me, what's the plans for winter this year?" They said, "Looks like it's going to be a cold one." Okay. A week later, they come back to him, members of the tribe. "Chief, what's it looking like?" He says, "I think it's going to be really cold. You better start collecting more wood." Again, he goes to the payphone, calls the National Weather Center. "What's it looking like?" "Oh, it looks like it's going to be extra cold this year." Next week, same thing. "Chief, no, what are you thinking? What are you seeing?" "I see it's going to be freezing this year." They're frantically collecting wood. He goes to the payphone again. He says, "Tell me, what do you see?" They said, "We see it's going to be blizzard this year." He asks the national weather guy, "Just tell me out of curiosity, how do you know this?" The guy said, "Well, how do you know this? The Indians are collecting wood like crazy this year." Showing, listen, Baruch Hashem, Israel today invented so much irrigation miracles, right? They could take but once upon a time, droughts were droughts. They were serious things. And the Gemara, and we believe that there was a lot of appealing to Hashem for intervention. It literally saved lives.